Hello, and welcome to Hollow Bear Games. This is our first devlog, and it explores our entry into the ludumdare 55 game jam using the Godot engine. My name's Justin, the coder here at the studio, and working alongside me we have the very talented team of artists Kim and Jenny. The theme chosen for the spring game jam was summoning, which is a fairly narrow theme compared to some of the alternatives that were available. The theme was revealed at 3 AM Central European time, so we were all fast asleep as the jam started, and it wasn't until 7:30 AM on day one that the team actually met up, bleary-eyed, and acquired our caffeinated beverages of choice before getting to work. We had sketched a rough timeline for the project in which we had set aside roughly 2 hours for ideation and game design. We used a variation on Crazy 8s to facilitate rapid brainstorming of game ideas. For those unfamiliar with this style, we each took 8 post-it notes and set a timer for 8 minutes, with the idea being that you spend roughly 1 minute on each idea before moving on to the next, with the core aim of having 8 high-level concepts at the end of the time window. This worked well, and we ended up with a bunch of wacky game ideas all centered around the theme of summoning. Now came the much more difficult task of whittling all of these down until we had just a single idea remaining. To achieve this, we created a yes-no rating system focused on 3 main categories. Achievability. Is it achievable from both an art and development perspective? This helps ensure that we can complete it within the 72 hours allocated to us by the game jam. Gameplay. Is there a clear gameplay loop without further ideation required? This would allow us to spend less time brainstorming and more time building. Theme twist. Given how narrow the jam category was, we felt it was important to have a good twist on the classic summoning concept to make sure that the game stood out. Ideas that received yeses for only 1 or 2 of the categories we immediately removed from the idea pool. This left us with just a handful of ideas for us to discuss together in more detail, after which we'd eliminated all but 3 ideas. The first game centered around playing as a magical farmer who needs to help grow his crops in time for that evening's dinner, and to do so you therefore needed to summon the aid of different nature spirits in order to assist with the task. The second game, you played as a traffic conductor at a wizard's tower during rush hour. You worked in the portal room and you had to complete the right summons for each wizard in order to make sure that they were sent to the right destination. The final game idea had you play as a demon bartender in a bar that was summoned when humans needed answers at the bottom of a glass. You would use your otherworldly materials and knowledge in order to help the humans in their time of need. It was difficult to narrow these down to just one, and we spent a large portion of our remaining time discussing these ideas in much greater depth. Eventually we settled on the third idea, as we felt having the bar summoned to the humans was a good twist on the normal summoning theme. There was a clear gameplay loop in creating these cocktails with strange ingredients in order to help with the humans' problems, and given it had a low number of scenes to create, it seemed achievable both from an art perspective but also from a coding perspective. By the end of the allocated time for the game design, we had settled on the following. The game would begin with you as the demon bartender clocking in for your shift. When the shift begins, it causes a human to stumble across the bar that has appeared as if from thin air, kind of like that bus from Harry Potter, but classier. Then, the primary gameplay loop begins. The customers will come into the bar, and they will have emotions they're having difficulty with appearing above their head. You must prepare a tonic in the guise of a cocktail using rare ingredients that can then magically cure these ailments. Creating these drinks would require between 1 and 3 ingredients. Serving the correct drink removes an emotion from the customer, and if they have no emotions remaining, then they leave the establishment cured of their ailment. Serving the incorrect drink adds an emotion to the customer. If they get more than 3, or if they have 3 emotions for too long, then the player would lose the game. With our idea now chosen, we immediately set to work on the next steps. We settled on theming the game's aesthetic around a 1920s Art Deco speakeasy. And just like that, the game's name jumped right out at us. Summoner's Speakeasy. So with that decided upon, our next steps involved getting some concept sketches for the game laid out, and that would allow us to block out the game's components within the game engine and make sure that the style and composition at a high level would work together. I began by identifying the primary resources that I would need in order to make sure that the different game components could interact with one another. I identified these to be ingredients, which would either be a liquid, a fruit, or a herb, and these are used to create a drink. Drinks, which is essentially a recipe made by combining a list of specific ingredients, and also what emotion would be cured when these ingredients are combined in this way. Emotions. an emotional ailment that's affecting the customer, such as sadness or exhaustion, and so on. Glasses, which would act as containers for preparing drinks in. These containers would store the list of ingredients within them and also perform the checks to see if a drink's recipe has been matched against the list of ingredients contained within the glass. Finally, customers. The customers are the ones we're trying to help after all, and they need to be able to accept a drink that's offered to them and keep track of which emotions they're currently suffering from. We deliberated on the correct number of emotions to include in the game, settling on a maximum of 5. These would be anger, sadness, exhaustion, stress, and fear. Based on these emotions, we also spent some time exploring what their ingredients might be. For example, fear requiring 2 alcohols in order to give the customer liquid courage. Once we had our rough blockout agreed upon, we then moved on to proposing a plan for which art would be required in order to complete the game. We settled on 3 customers, 5 emotions, 2 types of cocktail glasses, 5 liquid ingredients, 2 fruit ingredients, 1 herb ingredient, a bar area to act as a backdrop for the whole game, a bar top to act as the foreground for the player to prepare their drinks on, menu screens for pausing, losing, winning, and a general title screen for when the game first starts, a bar exterior for the customer to stumble upon in their hour of need, and a dreary street for the customer to be walking along when they stumble across this magical bar. In order to ensure we could get everything finished in time, we prioritized the art into a core category, which would be the art required to complete the core gameplay loop, and a nice to have category, which is the art required to effectively convey the story of the theme. With all of this decided, we set to work on our various tasks, and by the end of the first day, we had completed all of the initial setup for the base systems, and you could now correctly add ingredients to a glass and match drinks to them. The core gameplay's grayscale artwork had also been completed, as well as some of the initial work on the colouring process for this art. With this foundation in place, I spent an hour or 2 that night putting together a simple soundtrack that would match the 1920s aesthetic of the art in the game. I wanted it to reflect the sullen mood of the customers, as well as the element of time pressure in order to make sure that you cure the emotions in time. And here's a quick sample of how that turned out. Day 2 got off to a similar start to day 1, with each of us meeting first thing in the morning, only this time less rested than the previous day. We knew today was going to be a tough day as well, as the entire team were going to be working our normal 9-to-5 jobs on Monday, meaning we would have limited time to actually compete in the jam on day 3. Therefore, with that in mind, we set out and made every minute count. The art team spent day 2 highly focused on preparing the final colorized versions of the various assets we needed for the core gameplay loop. By the late afternoon, they had completed all of the 3 character designs, with each character having been modelled after one of the team members, except serving splendid 1920s fashion. We had also completed the various ingredients required for preparing the drinks that would actually be served to the customer. This included all of the alcohols and the 2 fruits and herb required. Lastly, but certainly not least, the bar itself was now fully colorized and perfectly ready to host its despairing clientele. On the development side, I spent the first part of the day adding the missing systems required for the core gameplay loop. This primarily involved the gameplay controllers for customer emotions, spawning customers, and making sure the drinks were able to correctly cure emotions and remove them from the customer. Coupled to that, I also implemented the win and lose conditions and tied those to the cures. Initially, I wanted the player to be able to place the glasses anywhere on the bar top so that they could organize the drinks in a way that worked best for their strategy. Unfortunately, however, it was later in the day when I realized that this wouldn't be possible with the approach that I had taken for the dragging and dropping mechanics in the game. This is primarily because I was using the built-in drag and drop mechanics provided by Godot's control nodes, which weren't really intended for the kind of behavior I wanted to implement. I spent some time deliberating on rewriting the component in order to support this, but ultimately decided against it in the interest of the remaining time. I instead focused on providing 3 droppable spots for the player to prepare their drinks in. I also spent some time learning how to use Godot's animation system, and this took up an unintended amount of my development time as I had to get to grips with how to use it best. Having now learned the ropes, however, I'm really loving working with it and will definitely be exploring it further in future jams. As previously mentioned, the team all had to return to normality for a brief period for our day-to-day careers on day 3. This sapped up a large chunk of our time from the game jam, and it was certainly more difficult on day 3 as we were all very tired from not just a long weekend of competing in the jam, but also from having just completed a full day of normal work. Our focus as a team that evening was preparing the art for the various menu screens, as well as the art needed to create the intro animations for the game. Thankfully, I'd already hit all of the pain points with the animation system the previous day, and I was very quickly able to put together some simple intro animations that conveyed the game's simple story. After we had our intro done and dusted, our attention turned to testing and polishing the game. This unfortunately uncovered several bugs, and a few of them took quite a lot of time for me to track down and fix. So with just an hour to spare, we finalised the last of our testing, uploaded the final build to itch, prepared our ludumdare game jam page, and then shut our eyes just as the clock struck 2 AM. Now that we've had some time to rest, I think it's good to look back on what went well during the jam, and what we would change going forward for future jams. So, what went well? We felt our ideation workflow worked really well for us, and we were able to generate lots of ideas very quickly and hone in on a final idea well within the allotted time that we'd set aside for this. How we shared work between the dev and art team and how we approached iterating towards the final game went very smoothly. As a team, we felt we had a really good flow and we had no major issues. Making use of Godot's resources to structure the different ingredients, drinks, glasses and so on made it super easy for us to make changes later in the project. We were able to deliver our initially planned concept, and everything matched the initial ideation intentions that we'd set out to create from the very beginning. We were really impressed with how closely it matched to our original vision. The game's art and music was really well received by the community. They really enjoyed the aesthetic and mood that the game put forth. In terms of what didn't go so well, or what we would change in future jams, a common piece of feedback was that players really struggled with the lack of an in-game tutorial. We did provide a tutorial in the page description, however, not having it built into the game in a way that staggers the flow of information to the player really hurt the overall playability. In future jams, we'll definitely be allocating specific time to tutorial creation early in the process in order to avoid this happening again. Linked closely to this was the lesson learned that we should playtest earlier, and playtest ideally with someone who's not part of the core development team. Our creation bias as a team led to us missing the frustrating lack of tutorial, as well as some sorely needed visual feedbacks. We felt our win and lose screens ended up being too similar looking. We had several community players not realise they'd actually won the game. We should plan the itch.io and LD Jam pages much earlier in the process and ensure that we've got a strong cover image from the start. We saw a substantial increase in player engagement after improving the store page's visual appeal. Overall, we had a blast participating in the jam as a team. Although it was exhausting, it was also very rewarding, and the community's feedback has been great. We are already excited for the next one, so keep your eyes peeled here for additional content coming soon. We hope you enjoyed this small dive into our creation process. If you have any questions or feedback, then feel free to leave them in a comment below. You can also find a link to the Game Jam game in the description. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and see you all next time.